All right, so this deep dive, we're really getting into some intriguing stuff. Meditation and karma.
Yeah.
It's a lot to unpack, right? Like, how do we actually burn karma? This isn't about some mystical bonfire, is it? It seems like it's more about some inner shifts and how we view the world and ourselves.
Right.
It sounds like from what you've been reading that meditation is kind of the key to unlocking this whole thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Almost like it helps us clean up those kind of ingrained habits we have, those negative thought patterns and behaviors. Have you ever noticed that?
Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting that the source material really gets into that.
Yeah.
It talks about how these repeated reactions, what they call negative mental conditioning, and it really is, that we create these ourselves.
It's like we get in our own way sometimes.
Yeah.
Even when we know better.
Yeah.
And it's funny, the source uses these, I don't know if you thought they were funny, but these really vivid images.
Yeah.
Talking about people being stuck in quicksand.
Right.
Or even better, a pig, like really enjoying the filth that's rolling around it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think it's to drive home this point that like we can be totally unaware of these negative patterns we're caught in, or even worse, like really attached to them. Like we're actually comfortable with that negativity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Right. And I think that's where this concept of karma comes in, right? The source really emphasizes it. It's not about some external punishment. It's not like you did something bad and karma's going to come get you.
Yeah.
It's more about the consequences of these patterns that we create in our own minds, like you were saying, playing out in our lives.
So then how do we break free? How do we like get out of the quicksand? The source seems to point to Vipassana meditation as a pretty powerful tool.
That's right, yeah. Vipassana is really interesting. It's about cultivating a very specific kind of awareness. So it's not just about like emptying your mind, you know.
Right.
It's really about learning to observe those thoughts and sensations without judgment. It's almost like you're watching them pass by without getting swept away.
That watching without judgment thing,
yeah,
that seems key here.
Absolutely.
Like the source talks about it as a way to like develop a different relationship with those thoughts in our heads, almost a let it be attitude.
Precisely, yeah. It's not about suppressing those thoughts or like trying to, you know, push them away forcefully, because we both know that never really works out, right? But it's more about creating space between like ourselves and our thoughts so we can see them for what they are. Just thoughts, not me, not mine.
So it's less about fighting them and more about, I don't know, like changing how we react to them.
Exactly, yeah.
Which, that's a pretty big shift.
It is a big shift. And the source highlights Vipassana as a really practical method to actually cultivate that shift.
Okay.
It emphasizes that this type of meditation, it's accessible to anyone. And it even mentions this resource. Have you heard of this? Dhamma.org.
Dhamma.org.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar.
Yeah, so from what it sounds like, they offer retreats, they offer courses, a lot of guidance to help you develop that awareness that we're talking about.
Wow, so a whole organization dedicated to this one practice. That's really interesting. It makes you wonder, like, what is so powerful about this specific type of meditation versus all the others out there?
All right. Well, it sounds like, from what the source is saying, that Vipassana really emphasizes this focus on observing.
Yeah, okay.
Observing the fact that our thoughts and feelings, even our physical sensations, they're constantly changing.
Okay.
And through this practice, through these very specific techniques, it lets you really see how impermanent everything is.
So it's about recognizing that like our internal state, our thoughts and feelings, they're not fixed.
Right.
They're always kind of in flux.
Exactly. Yeah. And then the source highlights that, like understanding that impermanence.
Yeah.
That's crucial for actually breaking free from those negative patterns.
So if you can see that a thought is just like a temporary visitor,
Yeah.
it loses its grip on you.
Exactly. It's not this thing that you have to identify with and hold on to.
That's so interesting. So it's like instead of getting so caught up in the content of our thoughts, we learn to, I don't know, observe the process of thinking itself.
Exactly. Yeah. And through that observation, that's where you start to see that we are not our thoughts, right?
Yeah.
The awareness that's witnessing them kind of come and go.
Okay. So I'm starting to see how this like ties back to this idea of burning karma, right?
Right.
By recognizing how transient all this stuff is, our mental states, it creates the possibility for change.
Exactly.
Oh.
Yeah. And the source actually uses this. I thought this was an interesting metaphor. It talks about how our minds tend to grasp onto these thoughts constantly. Like we're clinging to them like they're solid, like they're unchanging.
And it's that clinging that keeps us stuck, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Keeps us stuck in those negative kind of karmic cycles.
But then it offers this other point of focus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's that?
Your breath.
Oh, Interesting.
It says, by consciously bringing your attention to your breath, you can shift that focus away from those racing thoughts. You can kind of ground yourself back in the present moment.
Our breath, it is always there. It's
Yeah.
like this constant reminder if we can remember it.
Right, exactly. It's always happening right here, right now.
Right.
Unlike our thoughts, which, those can pull us into the past or the future.
Right. So by focusing on the breath, we're essentially training our minds to become more present, more aware of what is, rather than getting lost in what was, what could be.
Exactly, yeah. And the source suggests that this shift in awareness, cultivating through these practices like Vipassana, it has ripple effects on all aspects of your life.
It's like we're upgrading our internal operating system or something, like replacing these old reactive programs with something more intentional.
Yeah, it's a great analogy.
Something a little more us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as we become more mindful, more conscious of these internal processes,
Yeah.
the source suggests that we naturally start to make different choices that are more aligned with, what we actually value.
It's like that saying, you can't stop a bird from landing on your head, but you can stop it from building a nest there.
Right.
It's not about like eliminating all the bad thoughts, right?
Yeah.
It's about like cultivating this awareness and then choosing how we respond.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's where the real transformation happens. Not just in theory, but like how we actually live our lives. When we can pause, we see a negative thought,
Yeah.
and we choose not to engage with it, we're basically breaking a link in the chain of this karma. We're choosing a different path. And hopefully it's a path that leads to more freedom, more fulfillment.
It's like we're not just dealt this hand of cards, with our karma.
Right.
It's like we can learn to play the hand we're dealt skillfully.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. It's about recognizing that we're not just these passive recipients of fate, we're active participants in this whole thing. We're creating our own experience. And that brings us back to like the core message here, which is we have the power to change.
Yeah, and it's almost like we're shifting our mindset from this whole like fixing ourselves thing
Right.
to more like understanding and working with our minds.
Yeah.
With compassion. Like we're not broken.
Right, exactly.
We just have these patterns.
Yeah. Recognizing that we all have these habitual ways of thinking and reacting.
Yeah.
But we don't have to judge ourselves for it. We can meet them with awareness.
Yeah.
We can meet them with kindness.
And I think that's really like where the potential for change is. And it's interesting because the source points out that this isn't just about like us as individuals changing, right?
Right.
It talks about how those individual shifts we make, that awareness, it can actually ripple outwards. It impacts our relationships, the world around us.
That's right. Because naturally, as we cultivate more mindfulness, more compassion within ourselves, that's going to extend outwards.
Makes sense.
It changes how we interact with other people. We become more patient, more understanding.
We're less likely to like just react from a place of anger or, being judgmental.
Exactly.
So it's like as we heal ourselves, we're also helping heal the world around us.
Precisely. And I think that's a powerful thought to leave you with. If our minds are constantly grasping onto these thoughts, like the source was saying, as if they were these solid, unchanging things, how can we use these practices, like focusing on our breath, to really create positive change? Not just within ourselves, but in the world around us.
It's really incredible to think about.
It is.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. Lots to unpack here. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.